to the Eating at a Meeting podcast live. Welcome to the show, and it is April 6th. And I am so excited to be in my birthday month. Woohoo! Today is also the day that 3 years ago I moved in with my parents. So mayhem of that, which is what we're talking about today. But no, so excited to be living with them and supporting them through COVID and such, and them doing things for me. So on today's show, I am so excited to have my friend and meeting planning colleague, Terry Matthews-Lombardo, aka TML. She's an author, she's an event planner, she's a blogger, she's like everything.
I'm Woman of the Year.
You are Woman of the Year. That's awesome.
I loved this promotional thing. Somebody sent it to me years ago, and I oh, look, I'm Woman of the Year.
That's so awesome. Let's see. It's not going to Facebook, so we'll figure it out.
Okay.
We'll just go live anyway. But so Terry, you wrote a book called Meeting Mayhem. And
I did.
Yes, you did. Woohoo! And we were just talking, we were laughing before we got on the show about the mayhem of just even getting on the show, right?
Yes, exactly.
Glasses and sun and where does the book be? And, and I don't know where my ear pods are. The mayhem of that. There's mayhem of just in every single day. But tell everybody about your book and what prompted you to write it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think I feel like everybody has a story in them, right? Everybody, and a lot of people say this all the time. I really should write a book about, my Aunt Gertrude, or, I really need to write a book about my crazy kids and, how they drive me nuts or things like that. And I don't have a crazy Aunt Gertrude. I mean, we have some crazies in our family. There's no doubt about that. But anyway, my alter ego is what I always call the writer side of me. And I just, all these meeting planning stories, when you've been doing it as long as we've been doing, Tracy, which is a very long time. And we always say we've seen it all, we've done it all. And now I can say I've written the book about it. Yeah, thank you. And I got to tell you, so many other meeting planners along the way, once I released the book, were like, oh my God, that's the book that's been in my head all these years. I really wanted to do it. And I said, all right, here's your chance. I'm going to work on Meetings Mayhem Volume 2. Send me a story. We'll talk about a story, because a lot of people are reading it and saying, oh my God, that chapter 2 was amazing, but I can top that one. Or you didn't cover any story that's like the one I have to share. So I am starting to collect stories for Volume 2, because I just think they're so interesting.
They really are. And I was listening to or reading something about it. I mean, the life lessons that we learned from that mayhem, I mean, and it actually reminds me of Saint founder who, speaking me, but every single day she would come home from school and her dad would ask her, what did you fail at? And because if you don't try, you don't know if something works or doesn't work. And so the mayhem, even though some of it we don't want to happen, especially with the guy losing his ear, etc., how do we manage that and how do we learn from it?
Yeah. And it was really important to me when I first started collecting the stories. And then after I realized I had enough for a book and what kind of format that was going to take and everything, to put some learning lessons in there and make this a real tool for people who are not familiar with the industry, who don't know what we do. I mean, even in my own family and friends that I've known for many, many years. And they're like, oh my God, this is what you've been talking about all along, and they're not all my stories. As I said, I've collected these from a lot of meeting planner friends. So it was real important for me to, whenever possible, share a learning lesson at the end of the chapter. It's not always something that you could have avoided, the mayhem. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I'm also trying to get this as a either optional or required reading in some of the hospitality programs that are in the college campus.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and I was really pleased with the reception I've received so far. Every time I approach a college about it, they're like, "We like that you included learning lessons," and I also have some industry definitions and things I included in there too. Again, for the people who are outside the industry that are reading it, or students that can learn from it. So.
Well, and you don't think about, okay, one coming to mind of mine is like, somebody left their presentation, and this is 15, 20 years ago, left their presentation on a thumb drive in their office, and we're in Colorado, wherever, right?
Yeah.
And, and somebody's like, well, what do you, and we need
what do you do?
Right. And I actually called the company plane and asked them to bring it.
Oh my God.
I mean, yeah. So, and in that day and age, 15 years ago, there wasn't, Dropbox fast enough to do whatever, right?
Yeah.
To figure these things out, and neither was an iPhone available at the time, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think too about all the backups we have now with audiovisual presentations behind the stage. I mean, if for people that aren't familiar with that, sometimes I like to take pictures of my final, behind the stage settings. And, you can see 20, 30 computers sometimes set up to show different projections and things. And they're redundant backups for, for what's going on, but you got to have that.
Yeah, you do. And we were actually talking about an exercise class on Monday. Somebody mentioned that one of the restaurants here in my town has Rosie the robot delivering food to tables.
Oh, yeah.
And we were talking about it, but one woman said, actually the instructor said, she's like, it kind of scares me the fact that we're so reliant on technology at this point that when something goes down, we don't actually know what to do in its place.
Right.
And so we have to have plan B and plan C and D and E and F.
Yeah. And that's really, yeah, exactly. And that's really what the mayhem that I was referring to, the happy ending, so to speak, when there is mayhem, is that most good planners have plan B and plan C, and sometimes even more than that now.
Well, exactly. And technology wise and such, but I want to talk about Carolyn's story.
The food truck?
Because it's all about food. So.
Yes.
With the food truck, I mean, you don't think about, like, okay, I'm going to have a permit. I'm going to have a food truck, right?
Right.
And you can put it in the parking lot. Oh, well, no, you need a permit, and you need this, and you need it.
And I loved the part about even just the size of the truck, getting it into position. And then something that she pointed out toward the end was it couldn't be on a slant because it's a kitchen, right? It's a you can't have a kitchen rolling down the hill or even, slightly, and things like that you'd never think about. Yeah, I loved that story too. I thought she shared a lot of details in that I've never worked with that many food trucks. I've had one or two pull in, but they've let me, we've opened up the ballroom doors and kind of had them, walk outside. So that was an eye opener for me.
Yeah, and because you don't think about, I'm actually thinking of one that I did in Orlando at the Gaylord, and you had multiple trucks, but you have to make sure that they all have, food service handler cards and have the right, the right certification.
And
that they need.
Yeah, and to your specific point right now, Tracy, about what you're all about with eating at a meeting and Thrive, food trucks don't have labels quite often on their food. And I had to take that into consideration with a couple of times I've used the handful of food trucks, which ones have vegan options and which ones have some gluten-free options. And oh my gosh, I found out that of the 3 that I had come in, none of them had a gluten-free option, and I was shocked. So we really had to scramble, and we ended up getting it from the hotel as a backup, gluten-free options, because the food trucks didn't have that. So
interesting. Well, and you really do have to think about it. And I even remember going to an event, and you also have to think about the height of the food truck, and somebody short in stature or using a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Do they have access to read the menu? Can they actually get the food? Will somebody bring it out to them? Things like that. But also then, if you are doing that, what kind of seating do you have for people outside?
Yeah.
And that adds a whole nother level of.
Yeah. So many details go into that. Yeah. So it was fun. Yeah, I would love to get some more some mayhem stories about food disasters on site. So if any of your listeners are have anything they want to share, I'd love to, include some of those in book 2.
Oh, that would be fantastic. And I know I probably can come up with one or two myself, but it is, and you said it somewhere, it's like, we forget how well everything went. We just think about the mayhem that happened.
Right.
And the mayhem, just so for everybody else who knows, meeting planners' goal is to keep the mayhem behind the scenes. So that's why my hair is gray, right? So we keep that mayhem behind the scenes so that our attendees don't see it and don't experience it. So you don't necessarily know what's going on back at stage and happening, especially whenever. Yeah.
And I loved the very last story in the book about the swinging convention, and that's a perfect segue into that story, because his whole story was about rehearsal had gone fine. He had singers, dancers. He had an elaborate, if you remember the old Hollywood Squares set up, TV show, that's what they had on the stage. So they had different people, performers in each of the Hollywood Squares. Rehearsal had gone on without a hitch. They open up the curtain, the drum roll, the singing starts. The MC was supposed to be flying across the stage. And sure enough, as he flew across the stage, he went upside down and had to continue singing because part of his leash, the rope that he's attached to the harness, went wonky, which had never happened in rehearsal. And the singer went upside down and was doing flips, and that was definitely not part of the show. And but to his credit, he kept on singing. And of course, the director.
That's amazing.
Yes, exactly. But everybody else on stage is like, what's going on here? And the audience was like, is this a joke or what? And so they closed the curtains and, reset it. But, kudos to that performer for keeping on singing, even though he was upside down. But that's to your point about so many things go on behind the scenes, but sometimes it goes on right up front before your eyes.
And we witnessed that a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately. At the Academy of Work. So a little bit of mayhem in that. But, how do you deal with those things? And it is, so let's talk about the lessons that we learned and what does a meeting professional need? What skill sets does a meeting professional need to have? And I'm talking wedding planner, corporate planner, Olympic planner, the Bon Jovi concert, somebody that's planning that. What kind of skill sets have you seen, through your career, but also through these mayhems?
I think you just have to be so detail oriented, and you have to be able to second guess everything. Like when you think you have the perfect plan in place, then you have to go back and pick it apart and say, okay, what if it rains?
Right.
And we can't do this reception outside. What's my backup? And is my backup as pretty, or can I make it as pretty as the outside garden was going to be for this reception? And what kind of costs are involved with having my backup plan ready to go and things like that? So, I think as meeting planners, the ones that really rise to the top and do the best jobs, I think, are the ones that can really organize things, not only in our heads, but in writing. We know it all comes down to the paperwork and the details you share with everyone, and communicating those backup plans too. And a lot of meeting planners like to keep everything to themselves because they don't feel comfortable in sharing all their ideas. But honestly, you have got to get to a point where you're comfortable in sharing this, not only with your team, but with the hotel team. Lots of times, once we've gone into the pre-cons, as you know, and you start talking about this vision that you had in your head, and then all of a sudden the hotel says, well, wait a minute, We don't even
Mhm.
have those size tables to use, or our
Right.
tablecloths are white and not pink, or whatever the details are that you haven't shared before. So it's all about the details and the organization skills, and then being able to pick everything apart and start over again,
Right.
and make sure you've got your backup plans.
Well, and like you're talking about that, and I'm like, okay, this story's popping into my head, and this story's popping into my head. But I was doing an event in Las Vegas, and my client had signed the contract, and the hotel had suggested, oh, take this space downstairs instead of taking up over here. The salesperson was trying to get in a different client to take over, fly out the rest of the hotel. And I'm on a site visit with the sponsor, walking the space to see how it's going to run and flow. And come to find out, the other piece of business that the hotel sold, we had to walk through their convention to get to our exhibit hall.
Oh, yes.
And so, and I'm like, what the,
Gonna work.
And the poor CSM is there to deal with it, right? The hotel sold it,
right.
The salesperson sold it, and then the convention services managers, for anybody who doesn't know that, convention or catering services managers are there to pick up the pieces and make them work.
Yeah.
And
no matter what has been sold. Yeah.
Yeah. And they are, I mean, they're working constantly, CSM.
Yeah. They're the meeting planners of the hotels. So
they are.
And we all know the show must go on, regardless of the challenges behind the scenes, like you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, do you have any food mayhems that you collected, or in your experience, that you could share?
I'm trying to remember. I wrote. I think the special requests that we're getting now, in my opinion, are causing mayhem all the time. It's not just allergies, which obviously we're aware of, but it's hard for us as planners, once we put it out there, which we have to put it out there for choices. Do you have allergies? Are there things that but we're getting all kinds of responses now, terminology we haven't heard before, terminology we're not familiar with. I try and stay up with what you teach me, Tracy, but I keep getting challenged all the time. And to me, that's the mayhem right now. Maybe we need to write a food book, Mayhem.
Yeah. All right, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I got a text message from my friend Kendra a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, "Quinoa's gluten-free, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I'm having a guest who's celiac is telling me it's not." And I'm like, it doesn't, unless it was processed or whatever in a different facility. But I mean, it was a text back and forth with her and I, but the guest was questioning her. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
Interesting. And she's like, "I know I've learned this from you, and I'm looking at the package, but yeah, so it does come down to that mayhem." But even you and I were talking about this before we got on the show, is that we're 2 weeks out and we both have an event during Pacific, right? And I've said this before, like, there's only 80 days in the whole year that don't have a religious or
right.
Yeah. And but the mayhem that I've had to experience, I do have one person who's Orthodox Jew attending my meeting. And trying to figure out how to feed her, because it's not just kosher food, it's kosher for Passover.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so that's a whole nother learning experience. And to be honest with you, she told me, she said, "I've never traveled for Passover before." So she, as herself, is learning.
Yeah.
As somebody who follows the practices of the Jewish. Yeah. So
interesting. Yeah. And as you say, even with our level in meeting management, how many years we have combined with us, we're still learning things about that. I'm constantly amazed, Tracy, to be honest, talking about food and hotels, how many times, if I make the mistake of agreeing to a BEO that says chef's choice on vegetable or chef's choice on starch, I'm sorry, but I can't do that anymore. I have been bit too many times. I cannot believe my chicken plate will come out with cauliflower and white rice, and then, a lemon sauce on the chicken, or, and it's like, I'm sorry, did the chef even look at this coming out of the kitchen? I mean, we used to be able to trust the
Right.
chef would say, no, I need to throw a carrot on there, or, give me a broccoli stick or something. But you can't take that stuff for granted anymore. And to me, that's shocking. It really is.
Mhm.
And I'm talking about major hotels,
Right.
not that we want to name names, but we all know it happens. So I mean, it's no longer acceptable for any of us to say chef's choice on anything, even desserts,
Exactly.
we used to think you can't go wrong with dessert, whatever the pastry chef wants to do. No way. You have to detail
No.
that out very specifically.
Very specifically, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so making sure that, okay, you put cookies out, right? You have all these cookies, and you have ones with peanuts, and we have people with peanut allergies, right?
Yep.
And or whatever allergies. I'm like, can you put the ones with nuts on a separate
On a
platter,
separate platter, yeah.
just so that the person who has a nut allergy can actually eat the oatmeal cookie,
Yeah.
right? That has no nuts in it, and it's getting us all to think differently.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, one of the mayhems that we're going to have this year coming back as they're bringing meetings back is with staffing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And that's going to cause a lot more mayhem for us planners. Well, not just for us planners, but for CSMs and the kitchens and staffing, because we got to juggle it.
I feel like before COVID, we had finally gotten to an acceptable level on the food labels,
Mm-hmm.
which you've been trying for years and teaching the rest of us, and we've all been pushing. And I feel like before COVID, we had finally gotten a lot of the hotels to buy into. I don't want that to just say beef pot roast. I need to know, are there mushrooms in it? Are there carrots in it? Are there bell peppers and onions and whatever? So, but honestly, since now that we're back with meetings again, I'm having trouble getting that, achieving that level with labeling. And I think it's because the chefs in the kitchen are as short staffed as everywhere else in the hotel. And whoever used to do the labels, I literally had somebody, it was my banquet captain, pull out labels from his desk drawer when I had a buffet all laid out. And this was like 2 months ago. I had a buffet all laid out, and I said, oh my God, we got to get the labels. We got to get, better labels. He said, oh yeah, come on in my office. He opened up the drawer. Every label that hotel had ever done was in his desk drawer. He's like, find it. I said, no, we have to get the chef in here. This is mayhem. That was total mayhem. We have to get the chef in here. Did he put bell peppers in? I specifically had a problem with someone with a bell pepper allergy that day. And we really scrambled. And in the end, the chef just decided to make her a special meal, which was the right decision, because nobody could guarantee to me what was in that, that shaking dish for ingredients. So.
Right. Well, and that reminds me of the story that I told. I was working with Heather Harris, and we were at a hotel in Atlanta, and there was chip, beef, and gravy on the breakfast menu, right?
Okay.
And
haven't seen that in a while, but
I know, and this is a while ago. But the banquet captains are typically banquet staff are the ones that make the menu labels, and he has put that the gravy contains pork. And we had somebody with a wheat allergy, not celiac, but a wheat allergy. And I'm like, I looked at him, I'm like, you do know that gravy's made with flour and milk, right? Wheat flour. And he's like, oh, I don't cook. How would I know that?
Oh my gosh, I don't cook.
And he took a pen and he just scratched it out. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
I know. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
Okay. So in helping relieve mayhem or prevent mayhem, which we know is all going to happen anyways, but some sort of mayhem is going to happen. What does a safe and inclusive and sustainable food and beverage experience mean to you without discrimination?
Wow, there's so many ways to look at that. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as the coffee break station. Again, just reflecting back, first of all, we all know they're outrageously priced. Things that you have to look at now, I find a lot of hotels have just gone automatically to disposable cups. And they think everybody wants to walk around with their coffee, which is fine. But what a lot of planners don't realize is those disposable cups usually hold 12 ounces, right? Sometimes they're even bigger and hold 14 ounces. So how many cups do you think you're going to get out of your 5-gallon container if everybody's pouring a 10, 12, 14 ounce cup of coffee, as opposed to mug that, I might put 6 or 8 ounces in here, plus my cream, sugar, whatever, So things like that. And if you don't realize that until your ballroom doors are open and everybody's descended on the break station, and your captain looks at you and says, "We're out of coffee. Can we refill the coffee?" And I'm like, "How can we be out of coffee already?" Well, it's because you have only provided disposable cups. So, I mean, Mayhem can start from the very smallest detail like that. And going back to, like I say, just the example I gave you a while ago of that totally white plate that still comes out of the kitchen. You got to be so careful with your chicken lunch or dinner. Make sure your vegetable is colorful. Right. And one of my biggest pet peeves is not necessarily Mayhem, but it's just a huge pet peeve I have with hotels. I'm in there, let's say I'm in the hotel for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days of banquet menus, if it's a training seminar or something, and we've got lunch every day, and we've got a bread basket on that table. And I swear to God, it is the exact same bread every single day. And I'm always thinking to myself, does the chef not pay attention to these details? Or, surely it's not that I expect a fresh loaf of French bread every day, but I'd like a fresh loaf on Monday, and maybe Tuesday we have potato rolls, and maybe Wednesday we have wheat bread, or, whatever. You just get so tired of looking at the same thing. Same thing applies to Danish in the morning. I mean, how many times have we all had continental breakfast, and they say they're going to give you a variety, but I'm talking about, could we not be looking at the same variety on Monday that we're still seeing on Thursday morning? So
yeah, it reminds me of something that I've been chatting about lately, is that I asked a question, I think it was at IMAX in my education session here, how many people plan their food and beverage more than 30 days out? And we had about 100 people in the room, and only one person raised their hand. And I mean, and I'm guilty of it too, over the time, because we think we've got all these other things that we're working on, but we pick those, but we check. We want Mexican, we want Asian, we want the deli platter. I mean, every single hotel has the same thing.
If it's Monday, it's Mexican. If it's Tuesday, it's Italian.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do we? I mean, I know it makes it easier in that planning for hotels. I totally get that. But how can we mix it up some? And
that's a real challenge, and a lot of it, I'm sure you'll agree, goes back to the money. And the pricing, because the more money you have to spend, and I hate to even equate it to that, but it's true, because, and I'm sure you have the same thing, Tracy, with some of your clients, money is not a problem, and they would rather throw more money. They don't want to do Mexican on Monday. Okay, so what will the chef do for us? The chef can do whatever. He can do steak and lobster if you have that kind of budget. So a lot of it does go back to money. But now, very recently, in the last few weeks, I've been getting pushback on just the procurement of specific menu items. Like, we can't get mushrooms anymore, or we can't serve that hors d'oeuvre or whatever, because we just can't rely on the deliveries. Or we would have had to order that 2 months ago to have it in stock now. So those are challenges that we never thought we'd be having, right? But
right, exactly. And that LinkedIn user here, Laura Lee, she just said, variety is the spice of life. It is so true. I mean, but I agree with you on this, getting the food, and we actually really need to start planning our food and beverage more than 30 days out. Because of shortages, not only on staff, but also on food and beverage. And I mentioned just before the show is that the war in Ukraine will be having impacts on our food as well, because they're number one producer of wheat for the world.
Very
right?
true. Yeah.
And so,
who would have thought that
exactly
a war in Europe would be affecting our supplies right now?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we do need to try to eliminate as much mayhem as possible. But okay, so let's have our, we have to have option B, C, and D, right?
Yeah.
Even with your food and beverage, right? And I remember the other event that your story brought up, because you mentioned weather. I did an event at the JW Wardman Park in Washington, D.C., and we were doing a tent out front, and it was a football theme. We had all the food. We had the high school band there, and they're like, "50 tornadoes coming."
Oh my gosh!
I know, in Washington D.C., right? No, so they're like, "What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing?" And thankfully, Terry Singleton from CCP Events, who was on site with me, and she's the one that took the band. She's like, the band, we made an announcement, and the band led the entire group of people into the hotel.
Oh my gosh!
And
brilliant.
Right, it was brilliant. But at the Mayhem, I'm like, okay, hotel, we got to move everything inside right now.
Everybody's got to go inside now.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
And what can we do? Food and beverage? Can we just throw the bar up there? What can we do? I mean, we got to think on our feet. We got to act fast.
Right. Yeah. So many challenges like that.
Yeah. I can write that one out for your next.
That's why everybody has a mayhem story, right?
They do. They do.
Yes.
Yes. So definitely email Terry and let her know of your mayhem stories, because we need to come up with, especially some food and beverage things.
I would love to do a whole. We could dedicate chapters to that. Can you put my contact information?
Yeah, I will.
And they can just reach out to me. I am definitely working on volume 2 right now, and taking all stories. No details are small for Mayhem.
No, they are not. And I did put your I did put your website address to terryworldtravels.com.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then put your LinkedIn profile up there too. So in chatting with these other planners who provided you the stories, is there any other story that really resonated with you, or like your mind?
That not food related? Yeah, there was a lot of fun ones. I think chapter 2 in particular is probably getting more buzz than any other chapter, because it involves, how do I say this? It involves a man's private parts, and something that went wrong while her incentive trip was on a catamaran in the water. This is from our dear friend Syra Banu. Everybody knows Syra. So I've told her this before. Her chapter 2 is probably one of the more colorful ones, and fun to read about. I think another one came from our mutual friend Sharon Fisher from Play with a Purpose. She shared a really fun one about a client who asked her to hire a male stripper, to interrupt the keynote speaker. And the entire group was women in the audience, but the client assured her that the women would laugh and would appreciate it and go along with the joke. And needless to say, they did not laugh and appreciate it. They were shocked. And that was early in Sharon's career, by the way. She was working for a hotel then, didn't have her own business, but that was a real fun story to retell and hear about, because it was a perfect example of really understanding that the client is not always right.
Exactly. Yeah.
But she felt, because she hadn't worked there that long and she was a junior, it was a junior position in the hotel, so to speak. And because the client came directly to her and said, "Oh no, this will go over fine. Everybody will love it." And it bombed. It really bombed.
Well, and great, not to age Sharon, but
it was a while
ago. That would not go over at all.
Exactly. We talked about that. Yeah, exactly. It was a number of years ago, but it was still a fun story to tell. And
for sure.
The kind that you only do once. Yeah. There are some other stories that, I mean, I tried to turn them all into, to find the humorous side in the stories, but some of them, like Wendy Porter, her story was about having Legionnaire's disease on site at her convention. And Legionnaire's disease, a lot of people have already forgotten about, but that was long before COVID. And it was and still can be a very big thing, not only in the convention industry, but also in the cruise industry. And she had people die at her convention. So I had some challenges. Yeah, I had some challenges finding a humorous side to that story, but I thought it was an important story to tell because that was definitely mayhem.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. There was another story, again, trying to find the humorous side. I labeled the chapter Lend Me an Ear because one of her attendees went off on a drug trip during the conference and actually lost part of his earlobe. I mean, it was a crazy story. You have to read the chapter. And it was one of her employees, actually. So that's why she got even more involved. And because he was in such a different state of mind, he didn't even realize that part of his ear had come off. I think he hit it on the bedside or something. But anyway, those were challenging. Those were a little more challenging to find some humorous sides to them. But I thought they were important stories to tell because these things really happen.
They do, and you think they're not going to. And it reminds me of working for the Olympics in Vancouver, and we always have to do the what if, right? And I used to do what if Molly in high school, and it was like, what if I didn't brush my teeth every day, right? What would that do? But this is like, what if a hurricane happens? What if a pandemic hits, right?
Yeah.
Which was never in that conversation then, but what if, and we think that they're silly, and why are we wasting our time on them? But they are actually serious things. Like, what if somebody has a heart attack in the middle of the meeting, or a diabetic reaction, or food allergy reaction? What's the response?
What's the response? Yeah.
And Nancy put that up here. And Nancy, I don't know the context of it because I'm just seeing it, but not food and beverage, but medical. Those are mayhem issues that we have to really take into consideration.
Exactly. And Tracy, I'd love to include a story or two in the next book about what does happen when you have an allergic reaction on site or somebody. That would be interesting.
Because how do and just so everybody knows, not all EMTs are licensed and able to carry epinephrine, and even the venues in 36 states are allowed to have epinephrine on site. It's expensive, and they're not going to stock it.
Right.
We need it.
Yeah. I just had a conversation this morning before this taping for my upcoming program in Chicago. We're hiring some health professionals to be on site, even though everyone is supposed to be vaccinated and or supply, a negative test. We're still dealing with that. Everyone, the conference has been marketed in that direction. But anyway, we're having medical professionals on site. And I've had this for the last year or so, but this is the first time the med professionals have asked me, do you expect us to administer any tests on site? Because that means I have to have a different level of a medical professional that I'm supplying you with.
Wow. That's a good question to know.
I know. Nobody has ever asked me this question before, and we're going on more than a year, right? That we've been dealing with conventions with COVID testing or I mean, I was just really surprised and impressed. That was a very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question to start asking too of our vendors and our customers, because it does add another level.
Exactly. And it made a difference in the price I'm paying.
Right, exactly.
I mean, again, nobody's asked me this before, so I was always.
Well, and asking, and the fact that you have to say, hey, it's when you're calling 911, I need somebody that has epinephrine, right? Or something like that. You don't know to ask that. And I just thought of one other story, and I've told this story before, but it's when I was a corporate planner, we were exhibiting at a show and sponsoring a show, and one of my local colleagues attended the reception, and they were serving margaritas. And the next day, I'm like, we're all there and whatever. The next day, the event planner for the convention is like, let me tell you this story. And she's telling me the story. And this woman had fallen into the fountain at the Gaylord and split her head open. And this other guy got out and it ended up, I'm like, please don't be one of my employees. Please don't be one of my people. And it was a woman from the local facility. And our competitor is the one that pulled her out of the fountain and called 911. And I mean, she ended up losing the job because I have to report it to HR because she's been hurt. But but my main hit on that is that meeting planners have to pay attention. We need to make sure our bartenders are trained and they know how when to not serve somebody.
Right.
And it does make the challenge too, is when you've got 5 bars and maybe she went to just 5 different bars to get it so the one bartender never served it.
Exactly.
So that's the mayhem. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. And probably the least, one of the least, how do I word this? One of the things that we dread more than anything, right, in our meetings is the security factors and thinking of all the different safety precautions, because you can't ever cover everything. I mean, there comes a point where you have to understand you've done the best that you can under the circumstances. And
right. Yeah. I mean, you can't think of every single thing at all. It's too hard. But how you react to it and the composure that you have and the professionalism that you have reacting to that is what I think makes us better people and better professionals. Right.
And that's why I in the backside of the book, I included what everybody's designations were. Yes, because and I learned some new ones too about, because I don't do that much with exhibits, but certified exhibit managers and things like that, because everybody that contributed a story really are veteran planners at what they do. And I thought that was another really good takeaway, that this happens to even those of us. I mean, my degree is in hotel management. Every job I've ever had has been in the hospitality industry. And I still have mayhem at my meetings, no matter how many different scenarios I think about or try and predict. So, and the same goes for everybody that contributed a story. They're all veteran planners, but it happens.
Well, and the story with Paul Creighton as well. And the fact that he reacted, he wasn't actually even the person responsible for what was going on, but he's the one that took the helm and found the solution.
And pulled it together. Yeah. And that story is legend here in Orlando. I got to tell you. Oh, yeah. So many people knew exactly. And of course, we don't name clients' names, and we certainly don't put hotel names or anything, but that's legend. Everybody that read that from our Central Florida community knew, that was that one. I remember that. Yeah. There were companies that went out of business because of what happened during that event. And Paul is still thriving here, holding his head high, because, as you said, he was a secondary player that night, but he ended up being the savior of the whole event.
And I think I heard you, and I don't remember if I heard this in an interview or in the book, but he's the one that got paid.
Yes, he is the only one that got paid that night. Yeah. Everybody else, the client refused, because everybody else had caused the problem. And part of the problem, for those of you that haven't read the book yet, part of the problem was rain, which, obviously is a wild card, but it's Central Florida. So we all know it rains down here a lot in that time of year in particular, and they had no backup plan, and et cetera, et cetera. So there were some definite wrong decisions made, and not enough forethought put into it. It was years ago, again, when Orlando was just trying to launch itself as as what it is now.
Right.
And conventions.
Well, I think, and going back to what you said at the very beginning, Tyra Hilliard, Tyra Warner, you need to put this book in your curriculum as well. talking about contract clauses and how you can avoid these things, because I think it's, and I remember planning an event years ago, and these young planners are like, who are these people? Who are these old people planning this event?
Yeah.
But it's important for them to learn from that. And I think that it's been discussed, with, baby boomers and millennials, getting them to work together, and they're just oil and water. But it is important to learn from both sides.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, I think it'll help that. So
I've been going out to University of Central Florida. We have the huge Rosen Hospitality School, and I do lectures quite often. I'll be out there again next week, and I'm always learning from students. I'm always asking them questions about what they think about how I handled this event or that event, and it definitely there can be reverse mentoring in this world, and I'm always still learning.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Okay, so I have to be remiss if I don't ask you this question, but what is your favorite food and beverage?
Oh, my favorite food and beverage. Well, no question about the beverage. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm very happy when Jack Daniels is around me.
Jack
and I like each other, and probably anything that goes with Jack then. So, some nice cheese and crackers, and that makes me happy. Yeah. But I suppose
hotels that are welcoming Terry, hotels that are welcoming Terry to their event.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, is there anything that you want to share? I make sure that I've got everything in here, how everybody can reach you, but tell everybody how they can reach you.
I have a blog. It's called Terry's World Travels.
Okay.
And I always love to get more people reading my blog. I'm not a daily blogger. I'm not a weekly blogger. I try and just post an interesting story once a month, and I'm even behind on that, but hopefully one will go up next week or this weekend. And I try and write with humor the same way I wrote Meetings Mayhem. I try and write my blog with humor, and I try and focus on industry specific topics. So Terry's World Travels. And I'm not sure if I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I'm not real prolific on those. I'm always learning more, but yes. And of course, Facebook. I have a Facebook account. TML Writes is what that's called. Yes.
All right. So Tom Anderson. Hello, Tom Anderson.
Hello, Tom Anderson.
From San Diego. Hello, sir. I'm sure he's got some stories to share too.
I'm reserving a chapter in volume 2 for something he's going to share with me.
Okay, awesome.
I don't even know what it is yet, but he's promised me some stories.
Well, I promise you some stories. I did that for the first one, but I do need to give you some for the next one.
Yes, but, you do.
So thank you so much for being here on the Eating and Meeting podcast.
It was so much fun. Thank you for having me, Tracy. And this was kind of a warm up to GMID tomorrow, right? Global Meetings Industry Day.
Yeah, totally. Yep. We've got a full day of education wherever you're watching it. There's tons of it. Everywhere.
But I think this was educational too. I think.
Say that again?
I said I think this was educational too. Yeah. So that's why I said we were kind of the warm up today.
Yes, exactly. So everybody go, as Terry mentioned, tomorrow, April 7th is Global Meetings Industry Day, and through MPI and TCMA and Deborah Gardner,
Society of Incentive Travel Executives, and it's worldwide. So there are events going on everywhere around the world throughout the hospitality community, and meetings and events. So
tune in and see what you can learn from all these wonderful people that plan events around the world. So, Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. You know, I always love chatting with you.
Likewise. And stay with me for a few more minutes. But everybody else, thank you so much for listening to the Eating and Meeting podcast. We're live here every single Wednesday on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and buy Terry's book. Buy your book.
paperback, and it's also available in e-format, Kindle or Nook or Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, wherever books are sold.
Okay. We're missing telling you, I'm going to find out my post it for you.
Thank
so
you.
You can buy it. Yes, no problem.
Thank
Everybody, until next time, stay safe and eat well. And we've got a thank you from Nancy and a thank you from the other Nancy. So thank you both for being here. And until next week. Oh, I've got a special guest in Texas next week. So stay tuned.
Texas.
I know, everything's big in Texas.
Yeah.
So see you next week, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.